think I do. It's pretty heavy on that side.
Are you the commander?
What's that?
Are you the commander?
Yes, I'm the battalion commander.
Oh, good for you. So here we are.
And I'm Ann McGinley. I'm a professor at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas Boyd School of Law. I hope to see some of you there someday.
I'm Judy Simpson, and you heard more about me than you ever wanted to in your life.
My name is Michael Douglas. I'm a justice on the Nevada Supreme Court.
I'm Rachel Anderson. I'm also a professor at the UNLV Boyd School of Law.
And today we decided on question number 2. We're hoping that you'll enjoy this one. We thought it was very interesting. How has the Constitution been changed to further the ideals contained in the Declaration of the Independence? Number 2, how did the Southern states justify their decision to secede from the United States? How did President Lincoln and other Northerners justify treating secession as an act of rebellion? And why do you think secession has historically been viewed as unacceptable?
In 2006, Justice Antonin Scalia remarked that if there was any constitutional issue resolved by the Civil War, it is that there was no right to secede. The debate over the right to leave the Union had an enduring presence in early American politics. The Confederacy justified secession by using the language of the Declaration of Independence and insisting upon the state's continuing sovereignty. Northerners responded to this by asserting that the United States was a perpetual union first created by the Articles of Confederation and later reinforced by the constitutional implication that to form a more perfect union, that union must be whole.
Following the election of Republican Abraham Lincoln, without a single Southern state, the region feared for the total demise of its power, and slavery along with it. The seceded states subscribed to the compact theory, wherein the Constitution was read as we the states, instead of we the people. The Articles of Confederation further supported this, as they declared that each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence. The Confederacy went even further in its constitutional justifications. In 1881, Jefferson Davis said that the federal government was in disregard of the limitations of the Constitution, and thus destructive of the principles of the Declaration of Independence.
Since the South believed owning slaves to be a constitutional right, they saw the Northern violations of the Fugitive Slave Clause as being contrary to the founding principles of the Union. From this and other perceived infractions, they found justification for rebellion within the Declaration. A section of the document steeped in John Locke's right to revolution was even quoted by South Carolina's Declaration of Secession, that it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish an arbitrary government.
In his first inaugural address, Abraham Lincoln found that secession would make the Union less perfect than before the Constitution, having lost the vital element of perpetuity. In asserting the strength of the bonds forming the United States, the North justified it treating secession as a rebellion rather than a principled revolution, a position further supported by the incongruity of owning slaves being a fundamental right. Lincoln used this reasoning to justify the suspension of habeas corpus without any congressional approval, the institution of an illegal naval blockade, and the issuing of the Emancipation Proclamation, none of which were strictly constitutional.
Following the war, radical Republicans introduced a plethora of legislation intended to punish the former Confederacy. Among these measures were 3 constitutional amendments, which collectively gave slaves freedom, citizenship, and the right to vote, as well as providing for the supremacy of the federal government by bearing the phrase, "Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation." In fixing potentially fatal flaws of the Constitution, this legislation promoted the ideals of the Declaration over any Southern justifications, and, in the words of Justice Thurgood Marshall, in its place arose a new, more promising basis for justice and equality.
Despite negative views on leaving the Union, broader historical opinions of secession have certainly never been against the concept itself. Theodore Roosevelt aided Panama in its secession from Colombia, while the Union did not interfere with West Virginia's separation from Virginia. The argument can even be made that secession is one of the founding principles of this nation, as it was built on the seceded lands of France, England, and Mexico.
Separation from the United States itself, however, has invariably been viewed as unacceptable. In response to South Carolina's 1832 Ordinance of Nullification, Andrew Jackson said that secession may be morally justified, but to call it a constitutional right is confounding the meaning of terms. Jackson established a clear distinction between the right to a principled revolution and willful secession from what the 1869 case of Texas v. White described as an indestructible union.
The nature of the United States as indestructible has often been tested by the Union's own principles, most recently when the states used the Declaration of Independence in petitions to secede following the re-election of Barack Obama. However, history has resoundingly denounced the notion that the best way to further the meaning of the Declaration lies in the dissolution of the very union it helped to form. Thank you.
If I understood correctly your overall point, it was that it's not beneficial for the union to have secession, but it seems like that doesn't explain why the individuals or the states that want to secede shouldn't do so. So if the individuals or the states that want to secede feel that they're being harmed, why should they care if that's not beneficial to the country they're seceding from?
Many states actually are unable to do this under their own constitution, Nevada being one of them. We have a constitutional amendment that very explicitly states that we are unable to leave the union. So for many states in the union, it isn't a matter of whether or not they care about the effect it's going to have on the nation, but a matter of there being no legal right for them to do so.
In the case of the southern states, they felt that they had the right to secede with the Declaration of Independence and additionally with the Constitution in the 10th Amendment. They felt that the North had broken a compact, which was stated in South Carolina and Mississippi's Declaration of Secession. Additionally, they felt that they had the right to secede because the North was violating the fugitive slave law outlined in Article 4, Section 2, Clause 3. Now, additionally, they felt, stated in Mississippi's Declaration of Secession, that a blow at slavery is a blow at civilization and commerce. Slavery was their lifestyle, so that they felt with the North violating that they were taking away their lifestyle.
In Federalist 6, Alexander Hamilton said that to expect a continuation of harmony between a series of unconnected bodies in the same neighborhood would be to ignore the universal course of human events. What Alexander Hamilton was basically saying was that if we secede and we create all these individual separate bodies, it would be more harmful to the states as a whole because war would be inevitable, as we saw with the Civil War.
We have the Civil War. We have our greatest constitutional crisis, as the historians put forth. Are we even near that today as we talk in terms of gun control, gay marriage, immigration, health care? Do we have that kind of conflict? And someone mentioned, in terms of the constitutions of the state, are we truly we the people, or is it we the states?
Well, an interesting look at the original document of the Constitution says, we the people of the states, and then it lists every single state. Furthermore, the wording of the Constitution itself, multiple instances, refers to the various states. So I'd say that in terms of the original intent, we are in fact a body of distinct states. However, this has evolved over time to the point where just 2 weeks ago, the White House has responded to petitions from Texas mainly to secede from the Union, with basically saying you have elections, you have the right to change your union, you don't need to secede.
The point that you make is accurate, but was that position adopted? That was the draft, we the state.
Well, the draft wasn't adopted because of convenience sake. It was extremely difficult to know who would ratify the Constitution. So they just said, we the people of the United States.
So does that become the original intent? Or there's another thought that wasn't adopted? Because again, we come back to, is it we the people, the majority, or is it we the individual, i.e. a state who's disgruntled?
Ideally, I feel like people feel that it is we the people. But seen in recent events with current gay marriage rights, it has kind of turned into this fight for we the states. I actually sat next to a lady who works for the legislature, and she was telling me all about marriage and domestic relationships in Nevada and everything. And she was saying that in order for Nevada to pass an amendment stating that people have the right and freedom to marry an individual, it would take until about 2017 when it gets through the legislature, and then it would have to go back through. So additionally, as much as we want to say it's we the people, the states have a lot of power over that.
Now, moving back to the idea of a constitutional crisis for things such as gun control, we can really look to the way that both slavery and gun control have played out in the courts. Now, the issue of slavery was really propelled to the mainstream by Dred Scott v. Sanford, which pretty much took the idea of slavery and gave it to the states. Very similarly, the case of McDonald v. Chicago took the idea of gun rights and said that it was the responsibility of the states, rather than the federal government, to decide whether or not these gun rights were legitimate or whether or not they could be regulated. Now, we are also seeing, similarly to slavery, that the federal government really needs to get involved, as many states are having a very hard time regulating certain things, particularly high-powered weapons within their borders.
I'm willing to bet that all four of you have seen Lincoln.
Absolutely.
And in addition to the fact that the acting was unbelievable, why was it such a big deal for Lincoln to pass the 13th Amendment in regards to this question about secession? Why did this push him to do, he did dirty, rotten things getting that passed, didn't he? It was probably a shock to most Americans, wasn't it? That our pure guy cheated like crazy. Why? What pushed him to do this?
Well, the actions portrayed by the movie are kind of, they remind me of many of the actions that Lincoln took throughout the war, the suspension of habeas corpus, the blockade, none of which were legal. However, if we look at the Constitution, slavery, the South can point to the Constitution and say the Fugitive Slave Clause says that you cannot take the slaves away from us if they run away. So the South has the constitutional justifications, but Lincoln has the higher justifications within the Declaration of Independence.
Additionally, he is a man clothed with immense power. Stated in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1, he is the commander-in-chief, so therefore he felt he was justified in his actions.
But what's so important about the 13th Amendment?
Lincoln needed to free the slaves in order to get more support for the war. It was with the Emancipation Proclamation. It was his military necessity. With freeing the slaves, he received about 200,000 African Americans to join his cause.
Additionally, if we really look to the situation at hand when the 13th Amendment was being passed, we find that had it not been passed, it's not very likely that slavery itself would have ended at all, particularly because the South was more than ready to surrender to the North. However, Lincoln knew that if we didn't get that amendment passed when we did, and we didn't do it before the South had surrendered, many people would completely lose faith in the idea of getting rid of slavery in its entirety.
Thank you, Amanda. That's what I was looking for.
You're quite welcome.
You got it.
So, Amanda, and I'm not just, this isn't just to you, this is, Amanda mentioned earlier that many of the things, and I think John did too, that many of the things that President Lincoln did were illegal, habeas corpus, etc. Today, now with the help of the 14th Amendment, would he be able to get to do some of the things that he did or not?
Absolutely not. Even though the 14th Amendment has been passed, he still has to follow the regulations outlined for him in the original body of the Constitution. And unfortunately, the Constitution isn't on his side, particularly in habeas corpus. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2 very specifically states that Congress has the capability to suspend habeas corpus in times of rebellion. However, Lincoln did this instead, and that was a very blatant override of his power as a president. In addition, he didn't call Congress to an emergency session after he did that until almost 2 months later. So he really just was operating under this idea of do it first, ask questions later.
One of you mentioned in your talk, or answering Justice's question, Texas is a unique being, okay? Because it's a we the people is why I use being. What would happen if they went ahead and seceded? What difference would it make?
Well, their own Constitution provides a very good answer to that. Although many Texans are of the idea that they are more than capable of seceding from the Union and turning into a separate entity entirely, that's not what their Constitution says. What their Constitution says they would do if they seceded from the Union, so to speak, is they would essentially break up into 5 new states that were still part of the same Union that they hoped to avoid in the first place.
So they even call themselves the Republic of Texas, right? Okay. What, would it have an effect on the rest of the United States if they checked out?
It would have an effect on the entire world. If Texas seceded, then they would be the 14th largest economy in the world.
And that makes a difference because?
That affects everyone's trading within different countries, and it affects just the whole export-import business.
In addition, it would, because of the
We
nature
have to stop you. Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
I thought you were exceptional. I thought that the strategic way that you set up your opening statement was fantastic, setting out an overall theme. I thought that the way that you answered my original question was excellent because you had multiple layers to your response. You included the legal rights, you included the direction that humanity should go, and you included the question of war, right, so it being harmful to all people. I thought that you included comparisons of historical cases to current cases, policy arguments, and unbelievable knowledge of history and practical ramifications. I thought it was fantastic.
Everything that she said. Now, I'll go one further though. I was, as a judge of course, I was very impressed by your use of the Constitution and knowing the different clauses within it, but not just being able to parrot it, but to put examples next to the portions of the Constitution you're reciting. That was outstanding.
You also gave us a different historical perspective from many of the other groups we've heard today. So I appreciated that you added things. And Miss Amanda, you're going to write your own textbook, aren't you?
Yeah, I also thought you were excellent. I thought that you answered the questions really well, and I like the fact that you were able to give many different examples of things. Very good job.
You should be very proud of yourselves. The most important thing is this guy over here.